Hawker Sea Fury was a high-performance, piston-engined British fighter whose development began during World War II, but ended too late for it to participate in that conflict. The design originally responded to an RAF specification, but as the end of the war was approaching, the service realized it could easily win it with the existing types and the future belonged to jets anyway, so they cancelled the Fury. Royal Navy, however, still saw a need for piston-engine fighters, as it took some extra time to adapt jets for carrier use. So the development continued, and it resulted in a naval fighter called Sea Fury. The type was introduced to the Fleet Air Arms Service in 1947, where it was to replace the Seafire, a navalized version of the famous Spitfire, which was considered rather unsuitable for carrier operations with its poor visibility and narrow landing gear. Sea Fury was powered by Bristol Centaurus, an air-cooled radial sleeve valve engine with an output of 2,480 horsepower. It could accelerate the Sea Fury to a maximum of 460 miles per hour, or 740 kilometers per hour. The armament consisted of 4 20mm Hispano cannon. As the communist North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, Britain contributed its aircraft carriers to the UN forces fighting the invasion. The Sea Fury went to war. The type flew primarily air-to-ground missions, and initially the only threat was the enemy anti-aircraft defenses, as enemy fighters tended to stay near the Yalu River. But as the war dragged on, Royal Navy airplanes began to encounter MiG-15s. HMS Ocean, an aircraft carrier, was on a combat patrol which began on 22 July 1952. On 27 July, 2 MiG-15s attacked the formation of 4 Sea Furies near Chinampo. The MiGs opened fire from a long range but missed and quickly disengaged. Sea Furies returned fire, also from long range, but they didn't hit anything either. MiGs also attacked Fireflies, Royal Navy strike aircraft. 2 of them bounced a flight escorting a damaged aircraft back to the carrier. The MiGs achieved hits on 2 Fireflies which were forced to ditch west of Chodo Island. The next combat patrol of HMS Ocean began on 8 August 1952. MiGs were now clearly protecting the area south of Pyongyang, so encounters with them were likely. On the very next day, 9 August, Sea Furies flew their most famous mission in history. Early in the morning, 4 fighters took off and headed inland. They were flying armed reconnaissance, following the railway line north of Chinampo and checking the state of bridges along the line. The flight was led by Lieutenant, or as the British would say, Lieutenant, Peter Hoagie Carmichael. He was a World War II veteran who joined the Royal Navy in 1942. He initially flew Seafires, and in the late stages of the war he flew combat missions on Corsairs in Sumatra and Okinawa. He was now the acting CO of 802 Squadron. Other pilots in the flight included Sub-Lieutenant Carl Haynes, Lieutenant Toby Davis, and Sub-Lieutenant Brian Shmoo Ellis. But suddenly, a flight of MiGs came from 4 o'clock and opened fire. Shmoo Ellis called break after seeing tracers pass his aircraft, and Sea Furies turned tightly in pairs to face 8 MiGs. Sea Fury was much slower than the MiG, but it could turn much more tightly, and as such, it wasn't an easy target. Aircraft were shooting at each other all over, and at one point, Lieutenant Carmichael saw one of the MiGs streaking towards him head-on, and traces pouring from his guns. Carmichael opened fire at the enemy jet, whose pilot broke away, but then went head-on against the other 2 Furies. They opened fire at the MiG and observed hits. Another MiG then came down behind Carmichael with extended air brakes. The pilot was apparently attempting to dogfight the Sea Fury, but he shot in front of Carmichael, who aimed and fired his guns. The MiG pilot retracted his brakes and tried to accelerate, but Carmichael kept firing and observed hits in wings and fuselage. The MiG turned on its back and eventually crashed. The fight lasted for about 5 minutes, and Sea Furies damaged another MiG. The enemy formation then disengaged. 1 MiG was downed, 2 or possibly even 3 were damaged. Peter Carmichael was eventually awarded Distinguished Service Cross in 1953. He received a lot of publicity, and according to several sources, he maintained that a lot of credit for the kill went to the entire flight. This account is the official version and is described by most books which deal with the subject. But more recently, another version emerged. In 1978, the author and historian Paul Beaver interviewed all 4 pilots, as well as the armaments officer and the air engineering officer from 802 Squadron. According to these interviews, the pilot who in fact shot down the MiG-15 was Brian Ellis, the youngest among them. 21 years old Ellis was the one who saw a MiG-15 coming at him with its brakes on, and after it ended up in front of his Sea Fury, Ellis opened fire and achieved hits. He didn't see any spectacular explosions or pieces falling off, he just knew that he had hit the MiG. Moments later, Ellis observed the MiG hit the ground and explode. On their way back to the carrier, Hoagie Carmichael reported on the radio that he wanted to check his guns. He chose a patch of sandy beach, often used by British pilots for this purpose, and fired a short burst. Once the Sea Furies were back at HMS Ocean, the squadron's armaments officer checked the state of airplane's ammunition. Ellis had no ammo left, while Hoagie Carmichael still had 90% of his ammo. It is likely that he only fired on that beach during the return flight. But it looks like it was decided to award the kill to him, as he was the flight leader. Ellis didn't make a fuss at the time, but in the already mentioned interview to Paul Beaver in 1978, the participants agreed that Ellis was in fact the MiG killer. They however requested Beaver not to release any info until only one of them was left alive. This happened to be Ellis, and information about the MiG kill were published in 2018. MiG pilots attacked Carmichael's flight the next day as well. But this time, the communist pilots were smarter and didn't try to dogfight the Sea Furies. Instead, they were using boom and zoom tactics. After about 10 minutes, Sea Furies escaped into clouds. Carmichael was sent back to the UK after the end of the combat patrol, and he eventually died in 1997. The combat from August 1952 is a rare case in which a piston engine fighter shot down a jet. This can be contributed primarily to pilot training. There were well-trained Royal Navy pilots on one side, and not so well-trained, probably Chinese pilots on the other side. An older generation fighter certainly can defeat a more modern one, but it must be either a combination of lucky circumstances, or the pilot of the more advanced fighter must make a mistake. Thank you for watching. Please consider joining our Patreon supporters or donating on PayPal to keep the channel in business, and keep watching Showtime 112.